Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. We continue our special series presented by Benita Parker of the West Wallsend District Heritage Group, sharing the stories and lived experiences of the pioneering women of West Wallsend. Today, step into the 20th century and into a life shaped by deep history. You'll hear the story of Ida Viola Bohle, a woman whose family roots stretch back to the very beginnings of European settlement in Australia, to the arrival of the First Fleet. From a young teacher arriving in West Wallsend in 1926 to a lifetime spanning more than 70 years in the community, Ida's story is one of heritage, resilience and connection. This is not just a story of one life, but of generations.
My name is Ida Viola. I came to West Wallsend as a young teacher aged 22, and I spent the rest of my life in this wonderful community. I hope I can share the story of my life with you because I have been associated with West Wallsend since 1926 until now at my death aged 93 in 1998, a period of over 70 years, during which times I've seen many changes take place. I was the firstborn child in our family. Father looked at me with love in his heart and thought of his beloved viola, which was his favourite instrument as a musician. Thus the name. Mother's choice was Ida, and father's choice was viola. A viola is a stringed instrument in the violin family, larger than a violin but smaller than a cello, known for its warmer, darker and stronger tones. I like to think that that's me. But my family story goes much further back than my birth. Firstly, I'd like to share with you a potted history of my family tree. But where do I start? You see, on my grandmother's side, that is Susanna Burns, our family tree goes back through the female line to a tiny baby girl named Rebecca Small, born to John Small and Mary Ann Parker in a little cottage next to Government House in Pitt Street, Sydney, in September 1789. The records and my family history suggest that she was the first European-born girl in the colony, often referred to in those days as a native Australian. I'm very proud of this heritage because although both John and Mary Ann came to Australia as convicts on the First Fleet, arriving in January 1788, they made a success of their lives and raised a large family. I'm also proud of Rebecca. She married the Reverend Francis Oakes when she was only 17, and they had a large family of 14 children too. One of their daughters, Anne, married William Byrne, a politician, and it was one of their daughters, Susanna, who married Henry Bohle. That makes me a fifth-generation First Fleeter. On my father's side, there is also an interesting history. My great-great-grandfather, Henry Bohle, I'll call him the first, was born in Ireland in 1765 and married an important lady named Elizabeth Morehouse. From this time on, almost all the descendant children carry the name Morehouse, as do myself and my siblings 5 generations later. My great-grandfather, Henry Morehouse Bohle II, was born in 1785, but in 1811, he moved to Missouri, India, where he set up the first known brewery in India. He became quite wealthy and owned large estates. He was often away from home for long periods of time. Some years later, he was asked by a friend who was seriously ill to become guardian for his 3 daughters. Henry took this act seriously and married the eldest of the 3 girls, Alice Flanagan, in India in 1834. Henry continued to work hard and extend his estates until his unexpected death in 1851. Some years later, there was what is well known as the Indian Mutiny between 1856 and 1859, when, to survive, Alice and her sisters and the children, including Henry Morehouse Bohle III, born in 1842 and now a teenager, had to dress and live as natives because Henry's father had died a few years earlier. After the mutiny, Henry III, my grandfather, now a young adult who had inherited his father's estates, along with his mother Alice and the family, all migrated to Australia, staying in Parramatta near their cousins the Burns. To do this, they had to leave all their property and wealth behind them in India. This was difficult for them, but necessary, as things had changed quite dramatically after the mutiny in India. In Australia, Henry, who was an excellent horseman, along with his cousin James, undertook many different occupations, including in 1861 driving a herd of cattle and sheep from South Australia to Queensland. He married his cousin Susanna Burns in 1867 at Parramatta. She was the daughter of William Burns, a member of the Upper House of New South Wales Parliament. Remember, William was also the grandson of Rebecca Oakes Small. That's how the two families came together. Both my grandfather Henry III and my grandmother Susanna were very accomplished musicians and played a number of musical instruments. They had 6 sons, whose names all began with H and included Morehouse. However, their first son, Henry, died as an infant in 1869. Then there was William Henry, who was generally called Henry, Herbert, Harold, Horace, and Hubert. Grandfather's venture into cattle raising as early as 1865 failed through drought and Aboriginal troubles. He and his cousin James then returned to Sydney and became quite successful in the business world. As a result, a number of areas in the city were eventually named after him, such as Bohl River, Bohl School, Bohl Mountain, and Bohl Industrial Area. In 1872, the family moved to Newcastle, where grandfather Henry III became the government ballast master on the Hunter River. Here in Newcastle, they were frequently invited to play at special occasions throughout the district. Each of the boys also inherited the musical gift of their parents. My father, Hubert, was the last child in the family, born in 1877, and loved music from that day. My dad, Hubert, married Lillian Hooker in Newcastle in 1904, and they had 4 children. Myself, Ida Viola, born in 1905, Bessie, Alan, and Eric. Our family moved to Sydney in 1912, where there were better opportunities for my father to work as a musician and where Alan and Eric were born. This meant that I had started my schooling in Cooks Hill, Newcastle, but I went to Lidcombe High School in Sydney and then went on to complete my education in the city by attending King's Cross Technical College, where I qualified as a needlework teacher. As a family, we still had a keen passion for music and loved nothing better than an evening at home around the piano and strings, often with a few of our close friends. When I began my career as a teacher, I accepted my first appointment as an assistant teacher at North Strathfield before being transferred in 1926 to West Wallsend Public School, which was at this time a central school catering for all children from kindergarten to senior school. My salary was 2 guineas a week. This appointment was a long way from home in Eastwood, Sydney. My classes were large, frequently as many as 60 children in a class. My lessons were often conducted in the corridors or hall, as music and art were not regarded in the same way as English and mathematics. I also taught primary and super primary girls, and to make up my full-time teaching load, I taught girls Vigoro down in the park on Friday afternoon, or I took swimming classes. I also taught needlework and art at night school as well, so I was kept fairly busy. On the way north on the train to take up my West Wallsend appointment, I met another young woman who trained as a teacher, Miss Quintina, commonly called Queenie or Quen, Keane, who became my lifelong friend until her death in 1983. Quintina Keane was born in West Wallsend in December 1903 to Ellen Nesbitt Nellie Gray and Joseph Keane. Her mother's family, the Greys, had come to work in the mines at Minmi in the late 1880s. In 1889, Nellie Gray married Joseph Keane in Minmi. They had 7 children and Quen was the last born. The family had settled in West Wallsend about 1900, so Quen was returning home from a trip to Sydney when I first met her. In about 1925, Tom Reynolds and Quen both attended night school in West Wallsend. This is where they met. They married on Christmas Eve 1927 and went to live in Bridge Street. As she lived in West Wallsend all her married life, we were able to see quite a lot of each other during those years. They only had one child, a son named Lyle. He was born in 1929 at Glenayre Nurse Torrens Private Hospital. After various career changes, including mine work and as an insurance agent, Tom joined a firm of real estate agents. He did quite well for himself, and they were able to travel the world on more than one occasion. After Quen died, following a short illness in March 1983, Tom researched and wrote Early West Wallsend, Westy, Its People and Places. As I had a good singing voice, could play the organ, violin and piano, and was a bit of a breezy talker, I was soon accepted by the locals. The town was a very friendly place, and soon I got to feel quite at home, but still by myself with no family. It was about this time, in 1927, that the big West Wallsend Cooperative Society finished its final large brick extension to the shopping complex. It now stretched from Brown Street to Carrington Street all along Withers Street. It was a wonderful place to shop and all the staff were really helpful. As a young teacher, I could buy almost anything I needed here in town. It was through school that I met a gentleman named Alfred Sylvester Burton, who was a widower with a young family of 4 children, Joan, John, Edna and Raymond, all born between 1917 and 1923. Alfred and his first wife, Veronica, had met in Tingha and married there in July 1918, where he was a tin miner and she was a seamstress. They moved to West Wallsend about 1922 so Alfred could work in the new coal mines. Veronica died here in September 1925 of complications relating to childbirth when she was only 31. Alfred had no family to support him and was finding it difficult to care for 4 children, and so I often offered to assist him in whatever way I could. Soon it became a close personal relationship and we decided to get married. When Alfred and I married in June 1930, I inherited a ready-made family. Joan was 13, Jack was 11, Edna was 9, and Raymond was only 6 years old. Joan, Jack and Edna had all been born in Tingha, but little Raymond was born after Alfred and Veronica had moved to West Wallsend in about 1922. After we married in June 1930, yes, I was a June bride, Alfred and I started our own family immediately, and Alan was born in March 1933. Sadly, he died when he was only a little over 17 months old, and we were so sad. We did, however, go on to have 4 beautiful daughters, Rosemary in 1938, Marilyn in 1940, Kay in 1945, and Beverly in 1948. Apart from the terrible depression, which had started shortly before we were married, the mining companies decided to stop the trains and trams service which connected West Wallsend pretty much to the rest of the world via Wallsend and Cockle Creek. Cockle Creek was where the main north-south railway ran between Newcastle and Sydney. This led to everyone needing a car or bus to do ordinary shopping and business. For us, this was a real struggle, as I was no longer teaching, but trying to raise a growing family, and we didn't have a car. It was in 1948 that Alfred received a settlement from J&A Brown Mining Company for injury to his back, from which he never fully recovered, and he was forced to cease permanent employment. I sometimes reflect on those early days of marriage during the Depression of the early 1930s. I remember for the 6 of us, we got 14 shillings worth of groceries for a fortnight, 6 shillings worth of meat, and 5 shillings worth of green groceries. You could get it all from the Westy co-op store because they had so many departments there: drapery, hardware, grocery, carpet, shoes, chemist, cake, meat, confectionery with a tea room, blacksmiths and building supplies, and tailoring. The store used to be very good. When your family was allowed, say, 5 shillings worth of green groceries, they would write it down as green groceries, but allow you to take some of it out in seeds. That way, you could get more value for your money. You'd grow the beans and someone else would grow carrots, etc., and then you would swap around. It was a very good time in some ways. When we were first married, we lived in Terralba Street, West Wallsend, in a comfortable but small home. Our home was not very far from where old Joe Notley lived and raised his family. He was probably the first European to settle on land that is now West Wallsend. He died not long after we were married, and the little old home sat there as a reminder of the pioneering family right through until the late 1960s. With our larger family, we needed a bigger home, so we moved to number 74 Wilson Street, West Wallsend, about 1941. This was a beautiful old timber home built by old William Johnston before the turn of the 20th century, about 1888. It had an iron roof and a big backyard where Jock, my second husband, built all his aviaries. Mr. Johnston was the first owner of the Museum Hotel, only a couple of doors away from our lovely home in Wilson Street. We moved in at Easter time, 1941, when the family was still growing. We eventually managed to pay the house off through hard work and economy. It was a beautiful home with 5 bedrooms, each measuring 18-foot square with 14-foot ceilings. In modern language, they'd say that's approximately 6 metres square with ceiling height over 4 metres. I'm sorry, I can't think in metric measure, even though it came into our lives in 1968. The lounge room was 20 feet square. The kitchen was 16-foot square again, with 14-foot ceiling, with a large double stove that I could roast a suckling pig in, as it was so large. The hallway, which was 27 foot long, linked the kitchen at the back of the house with the bedrooms at the front of the house. I remember after my girls and their children had grown up, they would laugh and comment on how they would run flat out up the hallway from the kitchen to their bedroom because they were scared of the long hallway in the dark. Of course, in those days, we couldn't afford the electric light. I can still see it all quite clearly as I look back on those days. Later, as the family grew and our needs changed, to make space for a dining room, I had an archway replace a door into the bedroom opposite so that lounge dining stretched from one side of the house to the other. We also did another alteration over the years and built an enclosed veranda across the back of the house, which included a nice indoor bathroom. No more trips up the backyard in the wet or dark. Once we were established at number 74 Wilson Street, we, the Burtons, stopped having children after Beverly arrived in 1948. Soon after this, I got a job as the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages in 1951. I'm quite proud of the fact that I had this job for 13 years. Apart from the births and deaths I recorded, I conducted 12 marriages. I must tell you an interesting story about my work as the registrar and a possible wedding. One night, when we were just going to bed, a knock came on the door. A chap was standing there and he said, "Look, could you marry a couple? Everything is set at our place for the wedding breakfast." I said, "No, I can't." "Why not?" I replied, "Well, you know you don't marry after 8 o'clock at night or before 8 o'clock in the morning." It wasn't a rule. I think my mother told me that at some time, but I said it was the rule anyway. Well, those two people did get married a few months later, but to two different people. I really enjoyed the years I spent as registrar of births, deaths and marriages in West Wallsend. I met so many interesting people, each with their own story to tell. Alfred and I considered ourselves lucky that we had each other, a brood of growing children, and a lovely home in which to live. Oh, so many memories and stories to tell. But I must stop now. However, I really need to tell you about the death of my first husband and my second marriage, so please join me again next time.
You've been listening to part 1 of the life story of Ida Viola Bohle. From her remarkable First Fleet ancestry to her early years as a young teacher in West Wallsend, Ida's story offers a unique window into both the earliest days of the colony and the evolving community of the 20th century. Through her story, we glimpse not only her own journey, but the lives of those who came before her, and the foundations they helped build. Join us next time as Ida continues her journey through marriage, hardship, and the changing world of West Wallsend during the years of the Depression and beyond. Until then, thank you for listening to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.